Bananarama to our attention. There they were with Fun Boy 3, and it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it.
The Mystery Hour is brought to you with Sign Wizard of Compton Street, Eastbourne.
And as per usual on a Wednesday evening, I'm joined by Alan Pemberton. Alan, welcome along again.
Good evening, Brian. How are you?
All right, thanks. You?
Good, yeah, I'm fine.
Life after death.
I know.
It's an intriguing one, this, isn't it?
It is. One of probably the biggest one of them all, actually, is where we go after we die.
We've all had these feelings of deja vu and the whole lot, can't we? I mean, we can all turn around and think hang on a second, I've had this feeling of something, which makes us think that this, I don't know, of everything seems to be the one that we can all sort of give credibility and credence to somewhere along the line.
And also, when you think about it, I mean, religion has always said that we either go to heaven or go to hell. I think that's probably...
Right.
I think it's a question of going to hell and going to heaven, but certainly it seems that we do go on to another life, and the difficulty is, I think, for people is to imagine how we go and how it works, you know, so that is one of the great mysteries.
I mean, I've always sort of been of the opinion, I suppose, that to a degree, no one will ever really know until it happens.
Do you know, there's an incredible amount of evidence that's available, if people want to look into it, of communication between these two worlds, you know, this world and the next. There's a lot of, you know, people poo-poo it immediately, but if they would take the time to look into it and see the evidence there that's available to prove this to themselves. Anyway, tonight we have the very eminent scientist, and I hope you're there, Ron.
I'm here, yes.
Ron, that has actually come up with the scientific evidence for proof of life after death. And, Ron, it's a great privilege to have you on the show tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Great pleasure.
It's really, really nice to hear from you again. And you know that the subject is very close to your heart, and I know that your work covers far more, or a greater area than that of life after death. But that is what we're concentrating on tonight, Ron.
Yes.
And one of the difficulties, as I was sort of chatting to Brian there, is that one of the most difficult things for people to come to terms with is how we can possibly go from this body into another realm. I mean, scientifically, how can you do that?
From the work I've done, it's not in another dimension. The other worlds are in the same three spatial dimensions as ours, but they just exist superimposed, so to speak. But they're invisible to us. They are in another world, tuned to a different frequency.
Oh, I see. So when you say another world, what you're actually saying is that life consists of more than what we can actually see.
Oh, much, yes.
Yeah. How does that... Can you go into that a little bit for us, Ron?
Yes. I think I ought to just say how I arrived at this, because I didn't do it directly, but came at it as a spin-off from another activity.
Right.
What I was actually trying to do at first was to solve some problems in physics which have not been resolved so far, and indeed they have not been resolved yet according to the established physicists. I did in fact get a publication in a scientific journal last summer which summarises the whole thing, but what I started out to do was to solve the problem of quantum gravity. That's relating quantum theory to the forces on the large scale, like gravitation.
Right.
And what this showed was that there had to be a background medium which pervades everything. And this background medium had to be made of two opposite kinds of energy, which are called positive and negative.
Right.
And then when I investigated this background and just applied two simple laws of physics, which are the basic laws of physics, just two, I found that this background was in a state of continuous creation balanced by continuous annihilation. And this process automatically produced a structure very similar to a neural network, like a brain. And so what this spin-off showed was that this background, totally invisible, was built like a brain, like the network of a brain, all the nerve cells and so on, crisscrossing it, and so it could evolve intelligence and consciousness.
So what you're saying, let me try and break this down from the listener's point of view, Ron, because you're far more clever than most of us in this area.
Oh, no.
Yes, you are. There's no question about that. What you're saying is that in order for things to exist at another level, there must be some media in which they exist,
Yes.
some energy field or some form of matter which is invisible.
Yes, that's right.
So if you're going to send a radio wave or whatever, there must be a medium through which it travels.
That's right. This overturns a lot of present-day thinking, because in the last century, when electromagnetic waves were first analysed, it was thought that there must be a medium through which these waves could travel.
Otherwise it would drop, wouldn't it?
But then, well, they dropped the idea, because people tried to find this background by making measurements. In particular, two physicists, Michelson and Morley, tried to measure the speed of the Earth through this medium, and they just really got zero results. They got no result. And so the idea that a background could exist was abandoned. And then Einstein came along with his theory of relativity, and they were totally dependent on the background being absent. And so for these two reasons, the idea of a background medium was abandoned. But quantum theory tends to bring it back. Quantum theory can't exist without a background, and this is the main reason why relativity cannot be integrated with the quantum theory.
Ron, could you explain to us, in as simple a term as possible, how this would relate to, say, the existence from our physical being now, and then when we die?
Yes, okay.
How does that work?
Well, this background medium, which I've been talking about, is very like a huge computing system.
Right.
Like a neural network is this computing system, and these have been experimented with, artificial ones, for a long time, and in fact they're in use now. So the whole of space is filled with this hugely elaborate computing system. And it's a very fine grain. It's incredibly fine compared with our own brains.
Yep.
And then all it can do is make waves. So what it does, it decided to create a universe of matter and several other universes as well out of itself by manipulating these waves which it spontaneously generates. So it creates the quantum level of reality, which is where the atoms are depend on, and the atoms then form up to make objects which we relate to on the large scale. So we've got three levels of reality in effect: the subquantum level, which is this huge computing system, which is also controlled by its own consciousness. Then we've got the quantum level, which it directly refers to and produces, and then it produces in such a way that we see the material world. Now, there can be several worlds like ours, material worlds, and when of course, the consciousness, our own consciousness, cannot be part of the brain by this look at things.
So consciousness survives.
Has to be part of this background medium.
Right.
So that can be immortal, you see.
Yes. So that's how it works then, is that in fact our consciousness is part of this ether or this all-pervading media, yeah?
Yes, which is quite opposite from the...
Because they've never explained consciousness, Ron, have they? Nobody's really explained
there's a lot of work going on, but in my view, they're structuring it quite wrongly, because all the scientists assume that consciousness resides entirely in the brain and nowhere else. And in fact, this must be wrong. So
You're saying that the brain and the mind...
The current scientific paradigm is that consciousness and the mind are mere brain function. In other words, the neural network of the brain in its functioning produces the mind. And so that it cuts out when the brain dies.
Right.
But that completely eliminates the idea of life after death, and that's why the physicists won't accept it.
And that's why most people cannot understand how it is that we can survive death. But in fact, it's consciousness that survives death, because it's part of the ether, if you will. It's part of this background structure all the time.
Yes.
Well, that makes total logic to me.
It does to me.
Yeah.
And what happens if you go when your body dies? Well, you don't have to just have one body. You can have several bodies, all in the same place, each one built from the next matter system, which is out of range of our senses because it's tuned to a different matter frequency, different vibrations. So when you shell out this body, and that disappears, because it doesn't disappear, but it decays, your mind, which is part of this structure of the ether, then tags itself on to the next structure. So it will still seem to be in a material world and can continue to operate. It won't be the same material world, and it may have different laws of physics. But obviously it would have different laws of physics because it would be too monotonous if one had the same laws of physics in each world. So presumably each one's changed a little bit.
Ron, do you think that just as there are kind of laws of nature within this existence that they live now, when we pass over into the next existence, there will be also set laws of physics that apply there.
Yes.
So what you're saying is that world could be very, very similar to this one.
It could be very similar, and in fact, or it could be different in some respects.
Do you have any knowledge of that at all?
No knowledge, no personal. Well, very little knowledge. I have had some communications via mediums, which have helped considerably, but I've got no knowledge other than that. Because
that's really where I mean, this is not on a scientific basis, but I mean, there's been so much evidence, hasn't there? Well, I mean, probably prove is not the right word. It depends how much how much you've looked into yourself. But from my point of view, I've had very, very conclusive evidence of communication between this world and the next, and I'm sure you have as well.
I have indeed.
And so have countless thousands of other people through the ages.
Yes.
But it's so difficult. I mean, what you're actually doing, Ron, in your great work, is you're actually providing some form of explanation as to how this takes place. Because
certainly, yes. What my work shows is not only the universe of matter was deliberately created, but it says how it was done. Mm. It shows the mechanism involved in actually doing the creation.
It's an impossible question, but I mean, I think, can we then dismiss the idea of the Big Bang Theory, because that doesn't fit in with this at all, does it?
Well, the Big Bang, this is where I came in fact. In 1984, I was reading books about physics, because it was of interest to me, and I discovered that the theories of the Big Bang were totally flawed. The arithmetic was all right, the algebra was all right, but each line of the algebra contained logical errors. They just hadn't related the mathematics to reality in any way. And it was the flaws in this Big Bang theory which set me going. I thought, well, if this stuff's been published and passed the peer review, and everybody accepts it, there must be something wrong with the physics teaching. Right. Because nobody in my own discipline would ever have accepted this kind of false logic. And
it's very convenient.
I'm not a physicist. My profession is engineering. But in the overlap area between physics and engineering, it seems that we have the greater insights in this area.
Right. It just does seem to me to be a very convenient start. I mean, everybody wants to have a start and a finish to things, don't they? Well, the Big Bang seemed to me to be a fairly simplistic approach to how creation started. In fact, it's totally logical.
What my work shows is something similar, but not on a working the same way. I mentioned that you get these two, the background, but the two opposite kinds of energy, positive and negative. We can only obtain access to what seems the positive kind in our level of reality, but the whole basis of the creation is based on these two kinds. And it works out when the two kinds can interact, each one is made of particles, the only true particles in existence. When particles of positive and negative strike each other,
yes,
they actually breed. The laws of physics, conservation laws of physics, demand that they actually get more of each kind of energy coming away from each interaction, so you get a breeding effect. And so if you just started off with just a few of these initially, and they interacted, you get an explosive creation initially, which is somewhat similar to the Big Bang, only free from all its logical errors.
Right.
So you would get a Big Bang to start with, but when the density of this background this is only a background substance I'm talking about.
Yeah.
matter didn't exist at this stage. This is where my work differs from the conventional Big Bang theory. The conventional Big Bang theory, everything starts at one go, matter as well.
Well, Ron, I've just got to stop you there because there's matter at this end of the studio at the moment. We've just got to take a little break now.
Right.
We'll be back in a few minutes to pick up the story.
All right, then.
Okay, Ron.
Right.
Hang on.
I won't put my phone.
Is brought to you with Sign Wizard of Compton Street, Eastbourne.
Are you there, Ron? Are you there, Ron?
I am indeed.
Oh, excellent. What about the idea in your your new theories? Incidentally, you must tell us where people can get hold of your work before we finish the show. But what about the idea of living in other matter systems? Do you think there's other life forms in this universe?
Oh, yes.
Yeah? You say that with great confidence.
Well, it would only... I'm looking at it from a theoretical point of view, not from a practical point of view now. And from pure theory, it would seem that you'd almost certainly need to have others. Not an infinite number, as in the standard physics. That's impossible. But certainly the order of 7 or so. I say 7 because people from the other world say there are 7. But, I can't fix a figure, but it could easily be that sort of order.
7 other life forms?
7 is a figure which is given to us from the other side.
In our universe?
Not in our universe, but other universes of matter. Counting our universe, our own matter system as one universe, then there will be other universes of matter made in a similar way to ours by wave action.
Yeah, but Hubble has been spotting quite a few of these things.
No, you are not. You know, Hubble's only interpreting our own matter system. What he's seen are other galaxies in our own universe. There's no way anybody can see any other matter systems because the light we use isn't the same as theirs.
Okay, we're coming back to this, to the senses thing, isn't it? Our own senses.
Our own senses can't detect the other matter systems, except people who have a special sensitivity.
Right. Ron, how would people get hold of your work? Because it's very important. It's so difficult to understand what you're saying,
yes.
but I mean, I've known you for so many years. We worked on that video together,
yes,
The Science of Eternity,
yes.
which I'm pleased to tell you is still going extremely well.
Excellent.
And we did get somewhere in that one. But how can people get hold of your work so they can read it at leisure?
Yes. Well, I have made an information sheet.
Yes.
If they send me a stamped and addressed envelope,
right,
I can send this information sheet, which contains the references to the publications I have available.
Right. So if anybody would like to get the work of Ron Pearson, and I would strongly recommend that you do, because Ron is working in a whole new area of physics as far as I'm concerned, and I think it's the area that ultimately will start to reveal a new approach to science. You can contact me, Alan Pemberton, at Sovereign Radio, and I'll direct all that mail onto you, Ron.
All right.
Okay. Thank you very, very much for joining us. We're going to have a word with Michael now, who you've worked closely with for many, many years.
That's right, yes.
And we're going to have get a few points of view from him.
Good.
Ron, thank you very, very much for joining me on the Mystery Hour tonight, and we'll give that, we'll mention it again before the end of the programme. If anybody wants to get your work, they contact me.
I shall listen to the rest of it.
Okay, you do that. Okay, goodbye, Ron.
All right.
Michael.
Hello.
Are you there?
Alan, yes.
Were you able to catch any of that?
I've come in the last 5 minutes, yes.
Right.
What strikes me is that you're going to have to change the name of your programme now that Ron's sorted out the mystery.
What will I call it now, then?
I don't know.
The Invisible Hour.
Well, I've always said when this breaks, we haven't got to start any new thing, because we just go over to the physics departments and chemistry departments at the university. Or they're all there, aren't they? Or we just take them over. The psychology departments, the philosophy departments.
Yes.
It's nothing new, you see. This is old teaching that's coming in back into fashion.
I think what's coming through very clearly tonight is that science, as we know it, material science, has reached the end of its day almost, hasn't it?
Materialism.
I mean, you're staring mystery right in the eyes now.
Subatomic physics has destroyed materialism. We should have been following Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato. They all said there's a vast universe out there you can't see and sense. You see, we've lost that wonderful old teaching, which we just got to bring back into play again.
Materialistic philosophy, yes?
Same as they should never have got rid of the theory of the ether. That was an absolute disaster. because you can no more have survival after death with Einstein's theory of relativity, but you certainly can with the theory of the ether, you see.
Right. What about this chap, excuse me, Ron, mention his name, John Maddox? What's he up to? He's got a book coming out at the weekend that's going to
yes.
be looking at Stephen Hawking's work in a very negative light, I would think.
Yes, so much has happened since we spoke last Wednesday. Howard Wilson says a week is a long time in politics, but my goodness, a week's a long time in science now.
Yes.
Because since we last spoke, John Maddox's book's coming out this Friday. It hasn't actually come out yet, but it was reviewed in the Sunday Times last Sunday by Brian Appleton. And my goodness, Sir John Maddox, the former editor of the Nature magazine, has embraced all Ron's conclusions. I won't say he's embraced his work because I haven't seen the book yet, but all his conclusions are there, the whole lot.
I know. I've actually read that, Michael.
It's terribly exciting, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
it is.
Maddox has been saying to Ron for 10 years, I can't publish your work because more or less I've got to think of my readership. In other words, it would start a revolution. But since Sir John Maddox has left the editorship of Nature, he feels free now, and he's publishing his book this Friday, and he's got all Ron's stuff there, that even thoughts and consciousness are part of physics, you see. And he's ditching the theory of relativity and going back to the ether theory, and he calls Professor Stephen Hawking's idea of the Big Bang as a fairy story. And that's a sort of a sacred cow of science, the Big Bang has been, as you know.
Well, that's just, I didn't really hear him, but Ron was talking about that as well.
Oh, right, yes. I'm sorry to repeat anything if Ron...
No, you're not repeating it at all. It's just an affirmation of what we're saying.
That's right.
But at the end, I mean, if we were to make some bold, sweeping statements about the subject that we're talking about, are we saying something like, the reason we don't understand many things at a material level is because a great deal of life and the universe work, in fact, at an invisible level that we can't see?
That's exactly what Ron's saying. 99.9% of the universe is in the invisible part, and everything is coming from that invisible part, including our suns and moons and us.
Yes. So, in fact, I mean, our basic workings, I mean, what we're constructed of, in fact, is based on invisibility, isn't it?
Yes, we're built of invisible stuff. You can't see the building blocks of our physical bodies, not even through the most powerful microscopes.
Yeah.
Everybody's agreeing with the quantum theory. There's no fight over that. It's just that they've been trying to match up relativity with the quantum theory, and they can't, because they're totally incompatible. So one of them's got to go, and then, of course, it's got to be relativity. It's parts of relativity that are fine, which we can incorporate into subatomic physics, no trouble at all.
No, we're talking very, we can talk about Einstein's theory of relativity, etc., but it's quite, I think it's quite difficult for a lot of listeners, I mean, may not be familiar with that.
Well,
the thing I'm trying to get over tonight is that we've got to find some way of describing the transition from death to another life. That's my whole thrust of this program this evening.
Well, then we can do that very easily, because all the time we're on Earth, the etheric body and our mind is driving our physical body. We're plugged into this physical body, which is only a spacesuit.
Right.
So what our parents do is to make a spacesuit.
Right.
And that enables us, from the invisible part of the universe, to plug in. We make just as simple as that.
We inhabit a physical form.
Yeah,
that's
we
the
inhabit
thing.
that
So we
space
exist before then.
That's made it. Yes, oh yes, good heavens, yes. We're just coming in to have an experience on Earth. This is all we're here for, to gain knowledge and experience. And it's good to have the contrast of good and evil that we have to go through on Earth. And my goodness, we have to go through that, don't we?
It's like a school.
Yes, it's a school. And we should thank goodness for our short time on Earth, because without developing our characters, we would be quite useless. And when we go back into the next world, so they tell us, and it does make sense to me, that birds of a feather flock together. You go with what you've sort of done on Earth. If you've left a bomb in a crowded pub, you ain't going to be mixing with normal, decent people. You go to a different wavelength than normal people do.
Right.
And that makes sense. I'm not saying that's a scientific fact, of course, but we've got to think about the hearsay now when we know we survived death.
Right.
And it's hearsay that makes sense.
Right. I'm just going to have... are you still on the line, Ron?
Yes, I am.
Ah, excellent. Excellent. What do you think about Michael's just saying there?
I think you're bang on.
Yeah. So, what about this thing about when we inhabit the physical form from birth? Are we sort of that bit I don't understand. I mean, it's sort of some sort of limbo or something, or when we're born, or what point do we, from your point of view, what point do we inhabit the body?
This is Ron you're asking.
Well,
Yeah, it is, yeah.
I would-
Hang on there, Michael. Yeah.
This is a question which I can't answer from my physics, I'm afraid. I would say that you have to answer this from the by asking people on the other side. And I would say that, as a guess, that the time when the embryo becomes conscious would be the time it's inhabited by a mind based on the etheric world. But that's only a guess. I can't support this from physics.
No, I've never heard a satisfactory answer to that one.
I think it's terribly important, Alan, to always say, I'm sorry, I don't know. You must never sound as if you've got all the secrets of the universe. The main thing is we've got the proof of survival, which is a terrific quantum leap in science, but it opens up a whole stack of more questions, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
But never be frightened to say, I don't know. We just have to think about that.
I can't answer every question. I can only answer the questions which come from the theoretical analysis I've given. You can give answers from by reference to people who've spoken to people in the other world who have give answers, but that isn't from my science.
What about materialisation, Ron? Can that be explained in terms of
Yes,
physics?
it's perfectly feasible.
Yeah? How would you go about that?
Well, what it means is that people in the next world obviously have to be more advanced than ours, and somehow they have managed to make a substance by an interfacing substance using a mixture of our material, our matter, and their matter, something which can stick together, a composite substance from the two worlds, which can then be used to coat their own material bodies so that they are visible and touchable from our world.
It used to be called, I think it's changing, but it used to be called ectoplasm. It was actually a physical thing.
Yes.
When the Victorians started to photograph materialisations, I've seen a lot of those brilliant pictures.
Yes.
It was ectoplasm which came from the medium, which they used to build in.
That's
but I
right.
believe that's changing slightly now, isn't it?
I haven't any experience about this, but I have been
neither
told
have I.
that this has happened, that in fact the material has been developed by people on the other world, and to make it more advanced. So they're advancing as well as we are.
Yeah, one of the most extraordinary things that I ever heard was direct voice. So it was only a voice. I didn't see anything. I didn't see anybody, but I definitely was with a group of people where there was a deep trance medium, and about 4 different types of voices, including one that was singing, seemed to come out of the centre of the room, and that really was quite a stunning experience.
Yes,
there was no way that could have been fraudulent. There was absolutely no way. I was given the opportunity to check every bit. That was through the Noah's Ark Society.
Was it? Oh, yes.
George Cranley had invited me to go along to that.
Ah.
Brilliant, absolutely amazing.
Yes, it would be. These things do happen. And from my point of view, it isn't any longer something to be so mind-boggling, because what my work really shows is that what we think of as a solid matter system is really only a contrived reality. It's very much more like a virtual reality on a computer screen, only it's in 3 dimensions. The screen is the ether itself, and that provides a 3-dimensional screen on which the picture of matter is painted, and we're part of the picture. Our bodies are part of the picture, and it's made to seem very real.
Right.
But we are, in fact, deceived into his thinking it is totally real. And in fact, quantum theory shows it isn't real either. Once you go to the quantum theory, you find out that matter isn't anything like as tangible as it seems to be at what we call a macroscopic level.
Seems like the whole thing is a vast illusion, Ron.
Right. Deliberately contrived illusion.
Yes, that's right.
Somebody's damn clever somewhere, then. What a game. What do you think of that, Michael?
Yes, well, I think a good way of putting that is that our brains are finite, the same as our planet is finite. Eventually, our planet's going to be gobbled up by our sun. But our minds are infinite, you see, so it doesn't matter.
So our minds are actually, and maybe we could say mind, soul, whatever.
Yes, we're talking about
is actually
infinity.
part of a very permanent, well, not a permanent substance.
That's right. It's of the etheric world, our mind and the etheric body and the soul, if you like.
Which is imperishable.
Yeah, but our silly old physical body and brain packs in. It's only designed to last for a very short period of time.
What about these new discoveries they're doing in the aging process, whether they will, you know, they can make us maybe prolong life and keep us young and all the rest of it?
That leaves me cold, because I'm
Well,
quite
me a
happy.
bit cold
I'm
as
happy
well.
to get out of here as soon as my physical body conks out. I don't want to stay here too long.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Pardon?
I couldn't agree with you more.
I want to be with my mum and dad again, eventually. Yeah. But not until my body packs in. As soon as that gets on the blink, I want to get out of here.
So what you're saying is you think that we're all reunited with loved ones, are
Oh,
we?
well, we don't think we know. We've done these repeatable experiments where we've had Russell Byrne, who materialised at one of our experiments, has been reunited with his parents on something like 100 repeatable experiments.
Right.
And he catches hold and hugs them, and they lost their boy 20 years ago of cancer, but here he is, as fit as a fiddle, rushing around the room
So
with
you-
scientists setting up tripwires to try and catch him, you know.
Michael, do you realise how bizarre that may sound to a lot of listeners?
Well, they've got to read the subject, and they haven't had a chance to read it because we're not allowed to go on against Blackmore and Randy and those, you see. That's why. And it all seems fantastic because they've never heard our case before, apart from on local radio stations. And now Ron has broken through on national radio, as you know.
Brilliant. Well, what I'm going to do now is, Michael, I'm going to repeat. Actually, I sent some off to you today. People requesting your thesis on all this.
Mine, I list all Ron's work as well in my thesis.
You do, don't you?
Oh, yes, very carefully
Yeah, that's
listed.
true. So really, anybody would like to write to me, Alan Pemberton at Sovereign Radio, which is 14 St Mary's Walk, Helsham. And the postcode, I don't know, Sims's just writing this down for me frantically. If you'd like to write to me, I will forward all this, your information, send a stamped addressed envelope in, and if you, we've got a P.O. box, of course we have, yeah. So if you'd like information on Ron Pearson's work and Michael Roll's thesis, if you'd like to write to me, Alan Pemberton, care of P.O. Box 1075, and that's BN 27 1AT. I will make sure that they're forwarded to Michael, who will send you all the information. And it really is fascinating stuff. May have been a bit complicated to follow tonight, but believe you me, there's a lovely truth sitting in all this.
Can I have a quickie, just a quick thing?
You certainly can.
After we spoke last week, Alan, the phone went, and a physics student came through in great excitement. He says, I'm reading subatomic physics, and I've never thought about connecting it with the paranormal, but everything you said made sense. And I said to him, now you can understand why we're banned from going out to 100,000 physics students.
Right.
And of course he could immediately. He says, no wonder they're blocking you, because I could see what you were saying was true immediately, the physics student said.
Yeah, they'd have to print a lot of new books.
They would, and as you know, Ron has actually lectured to Professor Stephen Hawking's students at Cambridge University. And they could understand every word that Ron was saying, and they understood it all.
That must have made a change for you, Ron?
It didn't, unfortunately. 3 of them were going to write to me.
Yeah.
They're very excited about my stuff. But there was a big clampdown. It upset the hierarchy, and they were told not to contact me under any circumstances.
Were they really? What?
Yes. So
Like the Holy Inquisition, isn't it? It's even worse in science.
Yeah,
You can't suppress a truth, though, can you? Not indefinitely.
No, I think John Maddox's book is going to really put the cat among the pigeons this Friday. It's all going to happen this Friday.
Well, I sincerely hope, Ron, that you get all the credits that are coming your way for the fantastic work you've done
thank you very much.
over many years, and I've known you've been working on this. So maybe your sun is rising, Ron.
I hope so, anyway.
I sincerely hope so too. I'm sure.
Thank you very
it will.
much.
Lovely talking to you. Thank you for coming on to the Mystery Hour tonight.
It's very nice to speak to you, Alan.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, Ron. Take care. Thank you, Michael, for coming on board.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Lovely to talk to you again. And it just remains for me to say good night, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Mystery Hour. And thank you, Brian, again, for being a great mate on the show.
My pleasure. Another intriguing one, isn't it, that?
No, it's so complicated. That's the problem of it. It's so difficult to to break down into, you know, but it is all there if people
It's
want
the
to...
ramifications of it, isn't it? You can see why now it's not being allowed to be progressed even further. You know, the ramifications.
Academia would be turned upside down.
Yeah.
all the exam papers would have to be changed. All the books would have to. Oh, it's just massive.
Incredible.
No wonder
stuff.
Ron's having a little difficulty.
All right, and we'll be seeing you again next week.
Yes, you will indeed.
All right. Okay. Thanks very much for coming in again, Alan. All right, another interesting one. All right, that'll about do it.